You know, it's so easy for people on the right to condemn extremists on the left and for people on the left to condemn extremists on the right. Be principled. If you're a person on the left, condemn the extremism of the left. If you're a person of the right, condemn the extremism of the hard right. You're going to hear more about why both candidates failed that test in the first presidential debate here on The Dirt Show. When it comes to condemning hate speech and violence, no one distinguished themselves during the first presidential debate. President Trump clearly should have taken the opportunity to unequivocally say he condemns all white supremacy groups. He condemns Proud Boys. He condemns the Klan. He condemns the Nazi Party. He condemns anyone that regards themselves as a white supremacist. Now, he has said some of that in the past. After Charlottesville, he did condemn the Nazi Party. He did condemn the Klan. But he should take every occasion as President of the United States, every occasion, every opportunity, unequivocally and without reservation, to condemn them even if they are going to vote for him, especially if they're going to vote for him. He shouldn't give them any credibility. He shouldn't give them any opportunity to use what he said in support of their group. He said Proud Boys. I had never heard of Proud Boys. I didn't even know what they were. And in fact, it was Vice President Biden who apparently first mentioned Proud Boys kind of in a whisper, even before the president mentioned them. But the president should never have said, Proud Boys, stand down and stand by. Stand by sounds like we're waiting for an opportunity to invoke you. He should have been clear. He was clear afterward, and he did say, stand down, stand down. He should have gone even further than that. But I have to tell you, I was also disappointed with Joe Biden and how he dealt with Antifa. Now, Antifa is not just an idea. I don't care what Biden says. I don't care what the FBI says. How do I know Antifa is not an idea? Because they have attacked me. They have attacked many pro-Israel speakers, many Jewish speakers who try to appear on college campuses. Yeah, they call themselves anti-fascist, but they define as fascist people like me who support Israel. They define as fascist Israel. Many of the people who come to Antifa demonstrations come to condemn Israel and condemn Jewish support for Israel. We know that hard left movements like Occupy Wall Street and Antifa have been largely infiltrated by anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, and other bigoted groups. Now, you might say they're a loosely organized organization. So is Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has a platform. The platform calls Israel a genocidal apartheid country. I can't myself associate myself with any organization that has that platform. I agree with the concept of Black Lives Matter. I also agree with the concept of anti-fascism. I hate fascism, but I don't support organizations. At the least you can say about Antifa, if you want to say it's not an organization, that's playing with words. It's a movement. It's a very significant movement. I know how powerful it is in Berkeley, California, and other places. It's an anti-free speech movement. It's an anti-liberal movement. It's a movement that believes in disrupting speakers, in preventing speakers from speaking. It's an organization that believes in violence. They express it, violence against fascists. And they define fascist very broadly, basically to mean any organization that doesn't support their radical views. They believe conservatives and even centrists like me have no right to speak on university campuses, and they've been successful. They have stopped speakers from speaking, and Vice President Biden should have condemned it, should have said whether it's an idea or a movement or a concept or an organization, there is no room in America for an organization like Antifa, which doesn't believe in free speech. Biden said he opposes violence, but he had an obligation to go further. And I have to tell you, the moderator could have done I think, a better job. Chris Wallace, I regard as a friend. I've known him for years. His father was a friend of mine. I think he could have done more to press the speakers on their views on hate organizations. He should have pressed Biden to say, all right, it's an idea. Do you condemn the idea? He should have pressed President Trump to say, you say stand by? What does that mean? Are you suggesting they ought to be in waiting in case there's any need for them to come in and express their views or engage in violence? Look, I think that people on the hard right are much more reluctant to condemn extremists on the hard right, and people on the hard left are much more unwilling to condemn extremists on the hard left. Now, that's not surprising. What is very disappointing is people on the center left are often unwilling to condemn hard left anti-Semitic bigotry. For example, President Trump, he's a person who supports the right. He has a special obligation. He is supported by the right. He calls himself a conservative. He has a special obligation as a person of the right to condemn the hard right. And Joe Biden, who thinks of himself as a person of the left, has a very special obligation to condemn people of the hard left. That's part of their special obligation, because the hard left tends to identify with a candidate like Biden, and the hard right tends to identify with a candidate like Trump. It doesn't mean that Trump or Biden support those organizations, but they have to do more to separate themselves from them and to condemn them in the strongest terms. It has to be clear that there is no tolerance, no acceptance whatsoever of any extremism, any violence, no justification for violence. I've noted that people on the left make excuses for violence on the hard left. Well, you have to understand they have suffered from bigotry, they've suffered from racism, give them a break. All they're trying to do is make America a better place. And you hear from people on the right, well, they're patriots. They hate the fact that people are ripping down the statues. You have to understand, no. You can't justify, you can't understand, you can't forgive, you can't give a pass to any violence, particularly any violence that's rooted in bigotry. And the violence of both the hard right and the hard left is rooted in bigotry. Each have their own targets, each have their own people who they condemn in the strongest of terms, each have their own targets of their violence, but none of them is consistent with the American ideal of dialogue, debate, discourse, and protest. Protests are fine. Both political candidates should support peaceful demonstrations and peaceful protests, and both should condemn in the strongest terms violence. They have, on their own terms, they have both each condemned violence. President Trump has gone out of his way to condemn left-wing violence, and Vice President Biden has gone out of his way to condemn right-wing violence. That's easy. President Trump has to go out of his way to condemn extreme right-wing violence, and Vice President Biden has to go out of his way to condemn left-wing violence. None of these word formulas, it's just an idea, or people are patriotic, I understand. No. None of those excuses will work today. These extremist groups are looking. They're listening. They're waiting to hear, is there a dog whistle? Is there a subtle support for me? You saw what happened with Proud Boy. I never heard of them. Proud Boys now has T-shirts and logos and hashtags, all quoting President Trump. That's wrong. President Trump has to make it impossible for anyone to believe that he supports any group like Proud Boys or any white supremacist group, and Vice President Biden has to do the same. He has to make sure that nobody can ever quote him in support of their bigotry. Vice President Biden has been silent about Ilhan Omar, who is a racist, bigot, anti-Semite. She has expressed the most anti-Semitic views ever expressed on the floor of the House, certainly in my lifetime. I am waiting to hear Vice President Biden point a finger at Ilhan Omar and say, no, you are not part of the Democratic Party. I am the Democratic Party, he said. You are not in the same party I'm in. The Democratic Party does not tolerate your form of anti-Semitism and bigotry. I want to hear the Vice President of the United States condemn a member of Congress who refused to speak at Jewish or pro-Israel events. I want to hear Vice President Biden stand in strong condemnation of much of what the Squad has said and the influence they're gaining within the Democratic Party. No, he won't do it because he doesn't want to lose support on the left. And President Trump won't do the corollary because he doesn't want to lose support on the right. Neither deserves Profiles in Courage awards for how they've approached the issue of hate from their side of the spectrum. And so, my invitation today to the president is please get up there and expressly, without reservations, condemn Proud Boys, white supremacy. Again, you've done it before, the Klan, the Nazi Party, anybody who associates themselves with white supremacy. And please, Mr. Vice President Biden, get up there and condemn Ilhan Omar. Condemn any member of the Democratic Party who has expressed anti-Semitic views or bigoted views. Please condemn Antifa, whether you call it an idea. Condemn their unwillingness to allow free speech by conservatives. We need to hear moral leaders today condemn the extremists on their side of the political aisle. And unless you do that, it doesn't take courage to condemn the other side. It doesn't take any kind of integrity to attack your enemies. What it does take courage to do is to attack those who might support you and say, I don't want your support. I don't want people from Proud Boys to support me. I don't want Ilhan Omar to support me. I reject her support. I reject the support of anybody who has talked the way she has talked about Jews, about Jewish lobbyists, about AIPAC, about the nation state of the Jewish people, America's strongest ally, Israel. And so I hope in the next debate, which will be a town hall meeting of some kind, we will hear the strongest condemnations by both sides against bigoted hatred. And I think both sides should go out of their way to say, we condemn the hatred of those who support us even more than we condemn the hatred of those who oppose us. It's too easy to oppose the hatred of those who oppose you. It takes courage and guts and principle to stand up against those on your side who have gone over the line from protest to violence and from legitimate protest to bigotry and racism. So please, next time, go out of your way to condemn supremacy, violence, bigotry, particularly on your side of the equation. It's going to be hard to do. This is an election that could be close. Both sides want to make sure they don't lose any support, particularly in key battleground states. And every time you make a statement condemning an organization, you do lose some voters. That's the cost of being a principled politician. Go back and do your homework. Read John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. Read about politicians who placed principle over partisanship. Read about politicians who lost elections because they wouldn't compromise their principles. I'm not asking anybody to lose an election here. What I'm asking you to do is to put principle over partisanship, to put the attack on bigotry and the attack on violence over the desire to gain a few more votes. So I'm looking forward to the next debate. And even between now and the next debate, both President Trump and Vice President Biden will have an opportunity to condemn bigotry on their side of the aisle. Please do it. Please do it. I'd like to hear from you, viewers and listeners, about what you think. Will you yourselves condemn? You don't have the same bully pulpit, obviously, as the president and the former vice president. But will you condemn among your friends the extremists on your side of the political aisle, instead of limiting yourself to simply condemning those on the other side of the political aisle? So that's my message for today. My message for today, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of affirmative action. If you're a liberal, your special obligation is to condemn bigotry on the left. If you're a conservative, your special obligation is to condemn bigotry and violence on the right. Do it. That's what principle requires. This is Alan Dershowitz on The Dersh Show. I told you you'd never be bored. Now it's the viewers and listeners' turn to ask me questions. Jacob from Houston.
Calling about a comment regarding civility in debates and bringing back actual debate. Not only does there need to be a change in the behavior of the participants of the actual debate, but moderators have not been actually moderating debates for several years, including in the primary debates. We've had moderators actually acting as interviewers. And case in point, last night, we had an interview of two different people. When you have a moderator asking specific questions to each candidate, not the same question to all candidates, much less having follow-up questions, you're giving the moderator an opportunity to interact in a way he shouldn't. The same question should be asked for both or all candidates. The moderator should not ask follow-ups. This has to be done if we are going to start bringing our discourse back to some sort of civility, not just the change in behavior of the participants in the debate.
That's a good question. I have to tell you respectfully, I think I disagree. I think follow-up questions are very, very important, and I think it is the proper role of the moderator to ask follow-up questions, as long as he does it equally to both candidates and with the same level of objectivity or even critical objectivity. But I think follow-up questions are important. As far as asking the same question to both candidates, I think some questions should be the same. But if each candidate has different issues that are at the forefront, I think it might be fair. For example, you don't ask Joe Biden about his income taxes, and you don't ask President Trump about why he didn't do much when he was vice president for 8 years. There are questions that are specifically tailored to particular candidates, and I think it's fair. But the main point you make is that this isn't an interview. You're absolutely right about that. This is a moderator's job, and the moderator's job, most important, is to be very fair and objective and very equally tough on both candidates. John from Oregon, what's your question?
Hello, this is John from Oregon. One of your callers from last show threw in George Soros with Facebook and the mainstream media. As you know, many in the right wing believe that George Soros is a puppet master, and there are even some online petitions out there on stripping his assets, just like how the assets of Jews were stripped in Nazi Germany. I want to know if you condemn such anti-Semitism against Soros. Thank you.
It's a very difficult question you ask. I don't like George Soros. I am not an anti-Semite. I just don't like Soros's politics. I don't like what he did when he was a young man. I maybe understand it, but I certainly don't like it. I don't like the interview he gave on 60 Minutes. I don't like his organization, Global Watch. I think he sometimes uses his alleged do-gooderism to do well for himself. I oppose him in the marketplace of ideas. It's not anti-Semitic to be anti-Soros, but there are some anti-Semites who do pick it up and generalize from Soros to, Jews control the world. And when you combine Soros with, other people of prominence and who have Jewish names, as some have done in the past, that begins to go into anti-Semitism. But look, one of George Soros' strongest critics is Benjamin Netanyahu. Nobody can accuse Benjamin Netanyahu of being anti-Semitic. George Soros is virulently anti-Israel, and he has done nothing to support Jewish causes and other causes that are in any way perceived of as pro-Israel, and it's fair to criticize him. I will continue to criticize Soros while continuing to condemn those who use Soros as a way of promoting anti-Semitism. Our next call is from Blake in Rock Island. What's your question?
Hi, Mr. Dershowitz. My name is Blake Filippi from Block Island, Rhode Island, and I'm curious what your opinion is on 47 USC Section 230 as it relates to the liability of Internet service providers. Particularly, would it be plausible for Congress to repeal this provision as it applies to certain Internet service providers that restrict speech or have algorithms that restrict speech, essentially deeming them publishers instead of hosts, which would exempt them from liability. Deeming them publishers would actually allow them to be subject to civil liability for libel and slander that two users use against each other. Just trying to think of a way that we can fix the Twitter and Facebook and other service providers that are essentially restricting speech that they don't deem popular. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You've raised one of the most difficult questions. How can we legislate to make social media fairer? Look, I have been the victim of Twitter over and over again. You go on Twitter, I'm just libeled every hour on the hour. I'm defamed. And if I wanted to, I could sue, and maybe I will someday, the people who lie about me on Twitter. But I can't sue Twitter because if I were to be able to sue Twitter, they would have to then go through and vet every tweet, and it would make them less effective as real-time contributors having their say. It's a very hard question. There's no perfect answer. I think there can be situations where platforms should be held responsible for what they do, particularly if they make decisions about what to put on the air and what they don't put on the air. Once they get into that business, then it's reasonable to say, if you are making decisions, you're responsible for the decisions. But we have to make sure the First Amendment comes first and that we maximize freedom of speech. If you live in a world of Twitter, you have to develop a thick skin. And many of my friends say, don't go on Twitter. There are all these people that are just there waiting to attack you. No matter what I write on Twitter, I could be writing the most banal thing about, the basketball series that are going on, and people will attack me. So that's the way it is. You develop a thick skin. You sue when it's appropriate to sue. And you do everything to support the First Amendment. But thanks for your great question. Very difficult one. Mike in New Orleans.
I have a question regarding the confrontation clause of the Sixth Amendment specifically. Does it only apply when charges are actually officially brought onto someone, or can it be applied if someone is punished for charges that were never officially brought? Say they lose their job or something to that effect and never given the opportunity to defend themselves or face an accuser for something that could have been criminal but was never pursued as criminal. Thank you. Love the show.
It's a great constitutional question. The Sixth Amendment in terms only applies to criminal charges that are actually brought. Originally, it only applied to federal criminal charges, but now it applies as well to state criminal charges. There is legislation in some areas that give you a right of confrontation on college campuses that receive federal funding, etc. In America, everybody should have the right to confront their accuser. If you lose your job, you should have a right to confront your accuser. If you're suspended from school, you should have the right to confront your accuser. Look, I was a victim of that. I had a woman accuse me of something I didn't do, somebody I never met. She accused me in court papers, but not criminally. Of course, no prosecutor would ever accept her word because she had a long history of lying for money about prominent people. But I couldn't respond except in the media. I couldn't confront her because she refused to be confronted. She just filed these false allegations in court papers that allegedly exempted her even from being sued. Now, of course, we're in court, and I will confront her, and her lies will come out. But I sympathize with you. If you lose a job or lose your college degree, because you're accused, you should have the right to confront your accuser. Under President Obama, a terrible rule was enacted for university campuses, essentially preventing colleges from allowing confrontation of accusers in sexual assault contexts. That's being changed now. The American way is the way of the Sixth Amendment. If somebody accuses you, you should have a right to confront your accuser. Well, that's all for today's Der Show. You always have a right to confront me. Ask me questions, call in questions, listen to my show. As I told you, you'll never be bored, but you might disagree. And if you disagree, I want to hear your views. This is Alan Dershowitz for The Der Show. Call our listener line at 216-710-0050. I want to hear your questions, your comments, your criticisms, and your opinions. Remember, all calls are recorded and we reserve the right to use your questions and comments on the air. Once again, the listener line is 216-710-0050. I look forward to hearing from you. The Der Show is available on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts.